At my younger sister's lavish wedding, I found my name card pointing me to a seat completely outside the main ballroom, pressed right up against the kitchen dumpsters. She smirked and told me to stay out of the professional photos because my presence would ruin her wealthy aesthetic. I did not argue or make a scene. I simply smiled, picked up my wedding gift, which was a clearance certificate covering the entire $150,000 cost of the estate, and walked out. Minutes later, the general manager handed her the full bill. My name is Diana, 33 years old, and I am the shadow owner of the exact luxury hospitality holding company that owns the Grand Monarch Estate. The reception was in full swing when I arrived at the grand foyer. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the imported marble floors. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos carried heavy trays of premium champagne. I approached the welcome table where one of my sister Brittany's bridesmaids stood. She was a girl who had always looked down on me since high school. She handed me my escort card with a nasty little smirk. "Table 40, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Enjoy your meal, Diana." I walked past the breathtaking floral arrangements and the massive ice sculpture in the center of the main dining room. The room was packed with 300 formally dressed guests. I kept walking past the premium tables where my parents Thomas and Susan sat mingling with the family of the groom. My new brother-in-law, DeAndre, is a highly successful luxury auto broker. He is a brilliant African-American man from a dignified, wealthy family. My parents were bending over backwards trying to impress his parents, pretending our family had the exact same level of generational wealth. I walked all the way to the back of the massive room, but could not find table 40 anywhere. Finally, a confused catering waiter pointed toward the heavy service doors leading to the back loading dock. I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the humid evening air. There, sitting on the stained concrete patio, right next to the industrial kitchen dumpsters, was a single round folding table. It had no silk tablecloth and no floral centerpiece. It was completely bare except for a cheap paper napkin and a single plastic cup. The overwhelming smell of rotting food and harsh industrial bleach stung my nose. The kitchen exhaust fan roared above me, drowning out the beautiful string quartet playing inside. Before I could even process the sheer disrespect, the heavy doors swung open again. Brittany stepped out into the alley. She looked completely out of place, standing next to the trash, in her $15,000 Vera Wang gown. It was a dress my parents had secretly taken out a second mortgage on their house to afford just to keep up her fake rich influencer lifestyle. She crossed her arms and looked at me with a triumphant, cruel grin. "Guess you do not count," she said, laughing softly. "I just wanted to make sure you understood your place today. And do me a favor, keep out of DeAndre's family photos later tonight. You look way too corporate and stiff in that suit. You will absolutely ruin the whole elegant aesthetic I am going for." I looked at her perfectly manicured face and felt absolutely nothing. No tears, no anger, no sadness. Just a profound, sweeping sense of clarity. For years I had played the role of the boring, invisible older sister, while she was paraded around as the golden child. She thought she was humiliating me, but she was actually handing me the final key to my freedom. I looked down at the thick silver envelope resting in my hand. Inside was the venue clearance document fully executed by my corporate office, granting her the use of the entire estate, completely free of charge. I looked back up at her and smiled warmly. "You are absolutely right, Brittany," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "I really do not fit in here at all." I turned my back on her, taking my silver envelope with me, and walked straight down the service ramp toward the front valet stand without looking back once. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your true worth and tried to treat you like garbage. Walking away from that table was not just about leaving a party. It was the moment I finally decided to stop protecting the people who continuously tried to break me. I handed the valet attendant my ticket and waited as he quickly brought around my car. I slid into the driver's seat, feeling the soft leather against my back. As I started the engine, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I pulled out of the Grand Monarch estate, leaving my toxic family behind in their fragile house of cards. The game was finally over, and the real consequences were about to begin. The valet closed the door of my Aston Martin, and I merged onto the private exit road of the estate. The heavy bass of the wedding band faded away, replaced by the quiet purr of my engine. I reached toward the dashboard and tapped the screen to connect my phone. The Bluetooth synced instantly. I did not call my mother or my father. I did not care to hear their excuses or their scolding. Instead, I navigated to my favorites list and tapped the contact name for Gregory Harrison. Mr. Harrison was the general manager of the Grand Monarch estate. He was a seasoned hospitality veteran who had worked at five-star resorts across the globe. What my family did not know was that I was the one who personally interviewed and hired him 2 years ago. I am the founder and sole shareholder of Apex Hospitality Group, the holding company that acquired the Grand Monarch when it was facing bankruptcy. I poured millions into renovating it, turning it into the premier wedding destination in the state. Brittany thought some anonymous wealthy sponsor had gifted her the venue because of her influencer status. She had absolutely no idea that the sponsor was the sister she had just banished to the dumpsters. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Good evening, Miss Diana," Mr. Harrison said, his voice carrying the crisp professional tone he reserved only for ownership. "I saw you arrive on the security feed. Is everything to your liking in the main ballroom?" "Not quite, Gregory," I replied, keeping my eyes on the dark, winding road ahead. "I have actually just left the property. There has been a slight change of plans regarding the wedding tonight." I heard the slight shift in his breathing. He knew me well enough to know I did not make sudden changes lightly. "Of course, ma'am," he said immediately. "What do you need?" "I need you to pull up the billing profile for the event I instructed. You will see a 100% friends and family complimentary override applied to the final balance. I want you to revoke that override immediately." There was a brief pause on the line as I heard the clicking of a keyboard. Then Gregory spoke. "The override has been removed, Miss Diana. The current outstanding balance for the venue rental, the premium catering package, and the open bar comes to exactly $150,000. Print the itemized invoice," I told him. "Put it in a leather folio. I want you to walk into the main ballroom right now. Do not wait for the speeches to finish. Do not wait for the first dance. I want you to walk straight up to the head table and present that invoice directly to the bride." "Understood," he replied without hesitation. "And when she asks about the anonymous sponsor, tell her the sponsor was deeply insulted by the seating arrangements and has officially withdrawn all financial support," I said. "Tell her the bill is due in full immediately. She has exactly 15 minutes to produce a valid credit card that can clear $150,000. Knowing my family, I knew they were currently drowning in debt. My parents had maxed out every line of credit they had just to pay for her designer dress and the floral arrangements. There was absolutely no way they could cover the estate fees. "And if they cannot provide payment?" "Miss Diana," he asked. "If they cannot pay you, enact the standard delinquency protocol I instructed. You march the catering staff out there, and you pull the entrees. No filet mignon. No lobster tail. You shut down the premium open bar immediately. Lock the liquor cabinets. Replace the expensive champagne with pitchers of tap water. If they complain, you serve them plain bread and tell them that is all their current budget allows." "It is going to cause a massive scene, Mom," he warned gently. "The groom's family is quite prominent." "The groom's family is full of good, honest people," I replied. "They deserve to see exactly who they are marrying into. Do not hold back, Gregory. Execute the protocol." "Consider it done, Miss Diana," he said. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. The streetlights illuminated the dark interior of my car in flashing intervals. For my entire life, I had been told to be the bigger person. I had been told to absorb the disrespect to keep the peace, to let Brittany have her moment. My parents had trained me to be a human shield for her arrogance. But tonight I was not absorbing anything. I was reflecting it all right back at them. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal, speeding toward the city. Back at the grand ballroom, the clock had officially started ticking, and my sister was about to experience the most expensive reality check of her entire life. Back inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere was electric with celebration. The 10-piece live band was playing a smooth jazz rendition of a popular pop song, while waiters expertly navigated the floor, pouring premium champagne into crystal flutes. At the center of it all, sitting at an elevated head table draped in white silk and imported orchids, was Brittany. She held her phone high in the air, her ring light phone case illuminating her face as she live-streamed her grand reception to her thousands of followers. Beside her sat DeAndre, looking sharp in his custom-tailored tuxedo. He smiled politely for the camera but shifted slightly in his seat, clearly a bit tired of having a lens shoved in his face all evening. Brittany ignored his discomfort, completely absorbed in reading the glowing comments popping up on her screen. "Look at this gorgeous setup, you guys," she cooed into the microphone, posing with a glass of champagne. "Everything is absolutely flawless. When you manifest wealth and positivity, the universe just delivers." A very special anonymous elite sponsor gifted us this entire estate for the night because they loved my content so much. It is just proof that good things happen to good people. She had no idea that the universe was about to deliver a massive bill instead. From the corner of the room, Mr. Harrison emerged. He walked with the precise, calculated posture of a man who managed high-stakes situations for a living. His expression was completely neutral. In his right hand, he carried a thick black leather folio. He bypassed the VIP tables where my parents were laughing and drinking and walked directly up the steps to the elevated head table. Brittany noticed him approaching, and her eyes lit up. She immediately angled her phone camera toward him, assuming he was bringing a special surprise. "Oh my God, guys, look," she squealed to her audience. "The general manager is coming over. I bet the sponsor sent another bottle of vintage Dom Perignon, or maybe a special dessert just for us. Stay tuned, this is going to be so iconic." Mr. Harrison stopped at the edge of the table. He did not smile. He did not offer a congratulatory bow. He simply opened the black leather folio and placed it flat on the silk tablecloth right next to her diamond-encrusted clutch. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice projecting clearly over the music. "I apologize for the interruption, but there is an urgent administrative matter regarding your event. Please review the itemized invoice for tonight." Brittany let out a loud, theatrical laugh. She pointed the camera at the folio, thinking it was a clever prank. "Oh, you guys are so funny," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Is this a joke, Bill? Everyone knows this venue was fully paid for by my secret sponsor. You do not need to show me the numbers, I know it is expensive." Mr. Harrison stood perfectly still. His voice dropped an octave, adopting a firm, authoritative tone that made the guests at the nearest tables stop talking and turn to look. "There is no joke, Mrs. Vance," he stated clearly. "The anonymous sponsor you are referring to was seated outside on the service patio next to the dumpsters earlier this evening. She has officially revoked her financial support and has left the property. The complimentary override on your account has been permanently removed." Brittany stopped laughing. She lowered her phone, but the live stream was still running, broadcasting every word to her followers. Her eyebrows knitted together in confusion. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "That was my sister out there. She is just some bitter corporate employee. She does not own this place. She could not even afford the valet parking here. Actually, she is the sole founder and owner of the holding company that owns the Grand Monarch Estate." Mr. Harrison corrected her without missing a beat. "And she gave me very strict instructions before she drove away." DeAndre leaned forward, his relaxed demeanor vanishing instantly. "What instructions?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Mr. Harrison looked directly at Brittany. "The total outstanding balance for the venue rental, the premium catering package, and the open bar is exactly $150,000. You have exactly 15 minutes to provide a valid credit card to clear this entire balance." Brittany stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. 150,000, she choked out. I do not have that kind of money on me right now. My parents covered the other expenses. You cannot do this. If the payment is not secured within 15 minutes, I am ordered to enact our delinquency protocol. Mr. Harrison continued loudly enough for my parents' table to hear. I will shut down the kitchen immediately. I will lock the premium liquor cabinets, and I will downgrade the entire meal service for all 300 guests to pitchers of tap water and plain bread. The choice is yours. The blood drained completely from Brittany's face, leaving her looking like a ghost wrapped in Vera Wang. She stared at the black folio as the reality of her lies crashed down on her. Then, right in front of her new husband, her wealthy in-laws, and her live audience, she let out a piercing, hysterical scream. Even miles away, speeding down the interstate, I could almost hear the echo of her realization. The interior of my car was perfectly quiet, wrapped in the soft hum of the engine and the faint glow of the dashboard lights. For the first time in my life, I was not rushing to fix my sister's mistakes. I was not reaching for my wallet to smooth over a crisis my parents had created. I simply kept my eyes on the road and watched the city skyline draw closer. Then my phone began to vibrate violently in the cup holder. The screen lit up, flashing rapidly with incoming calls. First it was my father, Thomas. I ignored it. Then it was Brittany. I ignored that too. Finally, the screen showed my mother, Susan, calling over and over again. I let it ring 4 times before I reached over and tapped the screen, routing the call through the car's Bluetooth system. Diana, what in the world is wrong with you? My mother's voice exploded through the speakers. She was not just speaking, she was shrieking, her voice tight with panic and pure rage. Hello, Mother, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. Is the reception going well? Do not play games with me, Susan screamed. The general manager just embarrassed Brittany in front of DeAndre's entire family. He is demanding $150,000. He said you canceled the anonymous sponsorship. Tell him right now that this is a huge misunderstanding. Call him back and fix this before you ruin your sister's perfect day. There is no misunderstanding, I said, smoothly switching lanes. I am the owner of the estate. I gifted her the venue. But after seeing where you all decided to seat me, I realized my gift was entirely unappreciated, so I took it back. Are you insane? Susan yelled, her voice cracking. You are doing this on purpose because you have always been so terribly jealous of Brittany. You could not stand seeing her happy. You are blowing a tiny seating mistake totally out of proportion just to be vindictive. It was just a chair, Diana. You are acting completely unhinged over a chair. It was a folding table by the dumpsters, I corrected her calmly. While you and Dad sat at the VIP table drinking premium champagne, we had to sit there. We are the parents of the bride. Susan shot back defensively. And you know we do not have that kind of money to pay this manager, Diana. You need to fix this. Then you should not have thrown a wedding you could not afford, I replied. We mortgaged our house for her dress, Susan blurted out, desperation leaking into her anger. We took out a second mortgage to pay for that Vera Wang gown and those imported orchids. We are completely tapped out. We do not have $150,000. You make millions from your little properties. You are her sister, and you owe us this. You need to pay this bill right now, or so help me, you are dead to this family. I gripped the leather steering wheel, letting her words hang in the air. For 33 years, that exact threat had controlled my every move. The fear of being cut off, the fear of being dead to them, had kept me compliant. They had drained my college fund to buy Brittany her first car. They had constantly demanded loans they never repaid to fund her fake influencer lifestyle. They used the word family as a weapon to extract my resources while giving me absolutely zero respect in return. I do not owe you anything, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register. You chose to gamble your retirement on a $15,000 dress for a daughter who lies to the internet for a living. That was your investment, not mine. Diana. Please. My mother suddenly sobbed, switching her tactic from aggression to guilt. You are embarrassing us in front of DeAndre's parents. They are wealthy, dignified people. If they see us get kicked out of here, the wedding is ruined. DeAndre will be furious. Please, just call the manager. Be the bigger person. You always fix things for us. I am done being the bigger person, so you guys can comfortably be the smaller ones, I said. I looked out the windshield at the stretching highway. You put me outside on the concrete next to the kitchen dumpsters. You literally treated me like garbage. So I did what anyone does with garbage. I threw the gift away. Before Susan could unleash another hysterical scream, I reached out and ended the call. I did not just hang up. I went into my phone settings and blocked her number. Then I blocked my father. Then I blocked Brittany. The car was instantly silent again. My chest heaved as a massive breath of air left my lungs. The invisible chain that had been wrapped around my neck for over 3 decades snapped in half. I did not feel guilty. I did not feel anxious. I felt an incredible, overwhelming rush of power. I was not just driving away from a wedding, I was driving away from a lifetime of emotional extortion. But I knew this was only the beginning. DeAndre was a smart man and he was not going to let this sudden financial crisis go unquestioned. Back at the head table, the silence was deafening. The live band had awkwardly transitioned into a soft instrumental track, but the joyous energy in the room had completely evaporated. DeAndre sat perfectly still. He was a man who built a luxury auto brokerage from the ground up, dealing with high-net-worth clients, secure wire transfers, and ironclad contracts every single day. He possessed a finely tuned radar for nonsense, and right now that radar was going off like a siren. He turned to his new bride, who was currently hyperventilating into her silk napkin. Her phone, which had been broadcasting to thousands of followers just moments ago, was now lying face down on the table, hastily swiped away. "Brittany, look at me," DeAndre said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "What exactly did that man just say to you? Why is the general manager of the Grand Monarch Estate demanding $150,000? Brittany looked up, her eyes swimming in perfectly timed tears. She reached out and grabbed his hand, squeezing it dramatically. "It is Diana!" she sobbed, her voice trembling. "My psychotic, jealous older sister. I told you she has always been obsessed with ruining my life. She could not stand seeing me happy today, so she did something crazy." DeAndre frowned, his dark eyes scanning her face. "What do you mean she did something crazy?" "She hacked them," Brittany cried, burying her face in his shoulder. "Diana works in corporate management, right? She knows computers. She must have hacked into the estate's billing system and deleted the payment record for my anonymous sponsor. She fabricated this entire invoice just to humiliate us in front of your family. She is trying to ruin our wedding, DeAndre. You have to tell the manager to kick her out and fix their system." DeAndre did not wrap his arms around her to comfort her. He did not immediately jump to her defense. Instead, he slowly withdrew his hand from her grip. His analytical mind was already dissecting her story, tearing it apart piece by piece. "Let me make sure I understand this," DeAndre said slowly, articulating each word. "You are telling me that your sister, who you claim is just a bitter corporate employee, managed to remotely bypass the encrypted financial servers of a premier luxury estate. You are saying she successfully deleted a verified payment from an elite sponsor and generated a flawless, itemized physical invoice all from her cell phone while sitting at a table out by the dumpsters." Brittany nodded vigorously, her diamond earrings shaking. "Yes, exactly. She is insane, DeAndre. She is capable of anything." DeAndre's expression hardened. He dealt with secure financial networks daily. He knew that overriding a high-level hospitality billing system was not something you could just do from a mobile device between the appetizer and the main course. It required administrative access, security clearance, and ownership credentials. "Pass me the leather folio," DeAndre commanded, holding out his hand. Brittany froze. The fake tears stopped flowing for a fraction of a second. She placed her hand over the black folder, sliding it closer to her chest. "You do not need to look at it, baby," she stammered. "It is just a fake printout. My dad is going to handle it. You know how my parents are. They will call their lawyers and get this sorted out immediately. Please, let us just go dance and ignore this." I am not going to dance while there is a six-figure debt sitting on our dinner table, DeAndre replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Hand me the folio, Brittany. Now. Reluctantly, with trembling fingers, she pushed the black folder across the silk tablecloth. DeAndre flipped it open. His eyes scanned the crisp official document. It was not a fake printout. It was a legally binding invoice complete with the holding company's letterhead, Apex Hospitality Group, and the exact breakdown of every single exorbitant expense Brittany had demanded for the night, down to the imported white orchids and the vintage champagne. He looked at the bottom of the page. There was a section detailing the previous payment status. It clearly stated that the 100% friends and family complimentary override had been authorized by the estate owner and was subsequently revoked by that same owner at 7:45 p.m., the exact time Diana had walked out. DeAndre looked up from the paper, his jaw clenched tight. He looked at my parents' table where Thomas and Susan were currently arguing furiously in hushed tones, both of them sweating profusely. Then he looked back at his beautiful crying bride. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly clicking into place, and the picture they formed was incredibly ugly. He knew you could not hack a friends and family discount. You had to actually be family to the person giving it. DeAndre stood up from his chair, buttoning his tuxedo jacket, with precise, deliberate movements. The luxurious facade of the evening was crumbling right before his eyes. He noticed the catering staff lingering nervously by the kitchen doors, waiting for the 15-minute timer to expire. He noticed his own mother, a retired judge, watching the head table with a sharp, discerning gaze. "Where are you going?" Brittany panicked, reaching for his sleeve, her perfectly manicured nails catching the dark fabric. "I need to make a phone call," DeAndre said coldly, stepping away from her grasp. "I need to speak to the person who actually owns this venue, and I pray for your sake that you have not been lying to me since the day we met." He turned his back on the head table, ignoring the frantic whispers of his new in-laws, and walked purposefully out of the ballroom. The air conditioning felt freezing against his skin, but the cold realization in his chest was far worse. He pulled out his phone, determined to get the real story straight from the source. As the heavy ballroom doors swung shut behind DeAndre, the 15-minute timer officially expired. Mr. Harrison stood near the kitchen entrance, looking down at his gold pocket watch. He snapped it shut and gave a single sharp nod to the head of catering. Instantly, a synchronized army of 50 waiters marched out from behind the double doors. They did not carry silver platters of filet mignon or butter-poached lobster. Instead, they carried large, heavy plastic bus tubs. The guests watched in absolute confusion as the waiters systematically approached each of the 30 round tables. Without a single word, the staff began confiscating the chilled bottles of vintage Dom Perignon right out of the silver ice buckets. They reached across the white silk tablecloths and swiftly removed the crystal bread plates, the imported caviar appetizers, and the untouched shrimp cocktails. In their place, they set down thick condensation-covered glass pitchers filled with cloudy tap water and cheap plastic baskets holding dry white bread. A low murmur swept through the room like a sudden gust of wind. The 300 guests were completely stunned. At the VIP tables, DeAndre's dignified family members sat frozen in disbelief. His mother, the retired judge, watched a waiter physically pry a half-full champagne flute out of her cousin's hand. She placed her linen napkin on the table, her posture rigid with second-hand embarrassment. She had presided over messy criminal trials with more dignity than this reception. DeAndre's father shook his head sadly, refusing to touch the tap water. On the other side of the room, the atmosphere was entirely different. Brittany's perfectly curated guest list consisted mostly of lifestyle influencers, fashion bloggers, and minor internet celebrities. Loyalty in their superficial world only lasted as long as the free luxury perks. The moment the expensive champagne was taken away, the phones came out. Dozens of ring lights clicked on, illuminating the dim ballroom in harsh white circles. They began recording the repo-style repossession of the food, broadcasting the humiliating scene live to millions of followers across various social media platforms. They zoomed in on the waiters carrying away the towering seafood displays and panned their cameras over to the sad pitchers of tap water. Some even started narrating the disaster, mocking the sudden downgrade to their audiences. Brittany sat paralyzed at the head table. She held her hands over her face, trying to shield herself from the flashing cameras. "Stop recording me!" she screamed hysterically, but her voice was completely drowned out by the rising chaos of the crowd. Susan, her mother, covered her own face with a menu, utterly mortified and unable to look DeAndre's parents in the eye. Seeing his daughter's perfect aesthetic collapsing in real time, Thomas finally snapped into action. Sweating profusely through his rented tuxedo, he sprinted across the polished dance floor toward Mr. Harrison. Wait, stop doing this right now," Thomas panted, waving his leather wallet in the air. "You are ruining everything. I will pay the balance right now. Tell your staff to bring the food back immediately. Do you know who I am?" Mr. Harrison raised a calm hand, signaling for a waiter to bring over a wireless credit card terminal. "I would be happy to reinstate the dinner service, sir," he said smoothly, "as soon as the $150,000 balance is settled in full." Thomas aggressively pulled out a shiny platinum credit card and shoved it into the machine. "It is a premium elite travel card," he boasted loudly, hoping the nearby guests would hear him and think he was simply fixing a minor clerical error. "Run it for the full amount." The machine beeped, processing the request over the secure network. 2 seconds later, the screen flashed bright red. "Declined." Thomas swallowed hard, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. There must be a fraud alert because of the unusually large amount, he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Here, use my business account card instead." He slid a heavy blue corporate card into the reader. The machine whirred again, connecting to the bank. Red screen. "Declined." The whispers from the closest tables grew louder. Several guests were now openly pointing at him. Thomas' hands began to shake violently. He pulled out a third card, a basic rewards credit card, and swiped it himself. "Declined. Insufficient funds." Panic completely overtook him. He frantically dug through the tight slots of his wallet, pulling out a fourth card. It was a high-interest store credit card from a mid-tier department store. "Please just try this one," he begged, his voice cracking, losing all of its previous arrogant bluster. Mr. Harrison did not even bother hiding his pity as he swiped the final card. The machine let out a loud, sharp beep, echoing the failure. "Declined. You have no available credit on any of these accounts." "Sir," Mr. Harrison stated, his voice carrying clearly over the soft jazz music, "your accounts are completely maxed out. I am afraid the water and bread service will remain in effect for the remainder of the evening. Please return to your seat." Thomas stood completely defeated in the middle of the dance floor, clutching a handful of useless plastic cards. His grand illusion of immense wealth was entirely dead. The entire room now knew the absolute truth about his family. They were completely and utterly broke. And the worst part was the groom was currently standing in the quiet hallway, about to discover exactly who had engineered this entire flawless trap. He stood in the dimly lit carpeted hallway just outside the heavy oak doors of the main ballroom. The muffled sounds of the live jazz band and the chaotic murmurs of 300 confused guests bled through the thick wood, but DeAndre tuned it all out. He looked down at the glowing screen of Brittany's unlocked phone, which he had slipped into his pocket right as her hysterical meltdown began. He did not want to use his own phone. He wanted to see exactly how his new bride communicated with her own flesh and blood. Opening her text message history, he quickly searched for Diana's name. What he found made his stomach churn. There were no sisterly check-ins or warm wedding day wishes. The entire thread consisted of Brittany demanding cash transfers, complaining about maxed-out credit limits, and sending links to expensive designer bags she expected Diana to buy for her. It was a digital trail of pure entitlement. He tapped Diana's contact number and held the phone to his ear. Miles away, moving smoothly down the interstate, my car's display screen flashed with an incoming call from Brittany's number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was just more screaming from my mother, but something told me to answer. I tapped the accept button. Hello? I said, my voice flat and guarded. Diana, this is DeAndre. He said, his voice deep and completely steady. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, slightly surprised but pleased. I always liked DeAndre. From the few times we interacted at family dinners, I could tell he was a genuine, hard-working man who had built his automotive business through sheer grit. He did not belong in my family's circus. Hello, DeAndre, I replied. I figured I would be hearing from someone eventually. I assume the 15-minute grace period has expired. It has, he confirmed. They just took the champagne and the hot food away from every single table. Thomas tried to pay the venue manager with 4 different credit cards, and every single one of them declined. The entire reception is falling apart. But before we get to that, I need to say something to you. I listened as he took a deep breath. I want to sincerely apologize for the seating arrangement, DeAndre said, his tone filled with genuine regret. I had absolutely no idea they put your table outside by the dumpsters. If I had known that was happening, I would have stopped the entire wedding and moved you to the head table myself. Nobody deserves to be treated with that kind of disrespect, especially family. I appreciate that, DeAndre, I said, softening my tone. I know you had nothing to do with it. That was entirely Brittany's design. She wanted to hide me because I do not fit her fake aesthetic. That brings me to my next point, he said, his voice hardening with businesslike precision. I am a man who deals in high-value contracts every single day. I do not deal with lies, and I do not tolerate fraud. Brittany is inside right now crying and telling everyone that you maliciously hacked into the venue's billing system out of jealousy to ruin her night. But I know that is mathematically and logically impossible. So I am asking you directly, what is going on with this bill? I let out a short, dry laugh. She really told you I hacked them? She did, he replied. She also told me her family was loaded and that an anonymous elite sponsor covered this venue because she is such a popular internet personality. DeAndre. I said, carefully choosing my words. My holding company, Apex Hospitality Group, owns the Grand Monarch Estate. I bought it 2 years ago. I was the anonymous sponsor. I comped the entire $150,000 bill as a wedding gift to her. But when I arrived and saw where she chose to seat me, I revoked the gift. I am a businesswoman. I do not finance my own disrespect. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear his analytical mind connecting the final dots. The fake wealth, the declined credit cards, the sudden panic. If she lied about the venue, he asked slowly, what else is she lying about? I have always respected you, DeAndre, I said, pulling my car off the highway exit toward my downtown office building. You deserve a partner who brings equal value to the table, not someone looking for a human ATM. If you want the absolute truth about your wealthy bride, I need you to give me your personal email address right now. He rattled off his secure business email without a second's hesitation. I am pulling into my office, I told him. Check your email in exactly 3 minutes. I am sending you the deed to the estate, proving my ownership. And more importantly, I am sending you a comprehensive background check I ran on Brittany and my parents last month. You need to read it carefully before you sign that marriage certificate. Send it, DeAndre said firmly. And thank you, Diana. He ended the call. The trap was perfectly set, not out of malice, but out of a demand for the truth. He was about to receive the ultimate financial revelation, and Brittany's perfectly curated world was about to permanently shatter. I pulled my Aston Martin into the private underground parking garage of my corporate building. The heavy concrete walls insulated me from the noise of the city, offering a quiet sanctuary. I turned off the engine and reached for my secure work tablet in my passenger seat briefcase. I had run a comprehensive financial background check on my entire family 6 months ago. At the time, Brittany had been aggressively demanding a $40,000 loan, claiming she needed it to expand her influencer brand. I wanted to know exactly where the money was really going before I even considered replying to her. What I found was a financial sinkhole so deep it was impossible to fill. I opened my encrypted files and attached two specific PDF documents to a new email. The first was the deed of trust and the state corporate registry for Apex Hospitality Group, officially listing me as the sole managing director and owner of the Grand Monarch Estate. The second document was the 60-page financial dossier compiled by my private investigator. I typed a simple subject line, the truth. I hit send and watched the progress bar slide across the screen until it disappeared. In the corridor outside the grand ballroom, DeAndre leaned against the silk wallpaper. The muffled sounds of angry guests complaining to the waiters seeped through the heavy wooden doors. A groomsman stepped out, holding a plastic cup of tap water, looking completely bewildered. He started to ask DeAndre what was happening with the bar, but DeAndre simply held up a hand, silencing him without a word. The groomsman nodded, sensing the dangerous shift in DeAndre's mood, and quickly stepped back inside. DeAndre stared intently at his phone screen, waiting. A soft chime broke the silence. The email from Diana had arrived. He opened the message and immediately tapped on the first attachment. It was a scanned copy of a legal deed. His eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, bypassing the standard clauses until he reached the final page. There, stamped with the official state seal and notarized signatures, was the proof. Apex Hospitality Group owned the property in its entirety, and Diana was the sole authorized signatory. She did not hack anything. She owned the very ground Brittany was currently standing on. The lie about the jealous older sister instantly dissolved, leaving nothing but cold, hard reality. DeAndre took a slow, measured breath and tapped the second attachment. The file was labeled Vance Family Financial Summary. He scrolled past the executive summary and went straight to Brittany's personal credit report. As a man who ran a luxury auto brokerage, he looked at credit reports all day long. He knew how to spot hidden liabilities and manipulated assets. But he did not have to look hard to find Brittany's disasters. The numbers were staggering and printed in glaring red ink. Total unsecured revolving debt, $80,000. DeAndre stopped breathing for a second. He zoomed in on the itemized list. There were multiple maxed-out credit cards from high-end department stores, a massive balance on a luxury travel card, and several high-interest personal loans. Every single account was severely past due or in active collections. He kept scrolling down to the automotive section. He saw a defaulted auto loan for a luxury SUV. The vehicle had been quietly repossessed by the bank 3 months ago. Brittany had told him she simply sold the car because she wanted to upgrade to a newer model after the wedding. It was a complete fabrication. He scrolled further down to the section detailing her parents' financial standing. Thomas and Susan were carrying 2 underwater mortgages on their suburban home and had completely drained their retirement accounts. They were drowning in debt just to maintain the illusion of being upper-class socialites. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively slammed together in his mind. He remembered how eagerly Brittany had rushed the wedding planning. He remembered how her parents had constantly dropped hints about his successful business during family dinners. He remembered how she had casually suggested that they merge their bank accounts immediately after the honeymoon to make things easier. She did not love him. She had calculated him. DeAndre lowered his phone. The romantic illusion he had held just 20 minutes ago was entirely dead. In its place was a chilling, absolute clarity. He had been targeted for his income, his pristine credit score, and his business assets. He was not a husband to her. He was an acquisition. A financial bailout plan designed to rescue a family of frauds from their own reckless spending. His expression turned to pure ice. The warm, affectionate man who had stood at the altar earlier that day was gone. He locked his phone and slipped it into his tuxedo pocket. He turned away from the quiet hallway and faced the heavy ballroom doors, ready to confront the woman who had tried to play him for a fool. He bypassed the main ballroom and headed straight for the private bridal suite down the corridor. He knew exactly where she would run when things got uncomfortable. As he approached the heavy double doors, he could hear her sharp, shrill voice echoing into the hallway. Inside, Brittany was sitting in front of a massive lighted vanity mirror. A terrified makeup artist hovered over her, trying to fix the mascara she had deliberately smudged during her fake crying spell. Brittany slapped the makeup brush away. "Do not just stand there, you idiot!" Brittany snapped at the girl. "Fix my contour. I cannot go back out there looking like a victim. And somebody go find me a real drink. I am not drinking tap water like some peasant." DeAndre pushed the door open, letting it click shut heavily behind him. The sound made Brittany jump. She immediately plastered on her sweet, helpless victim expression and reached her arms out toward him. "Baby," she whined. "Thank God you are here. This venue manager is completely insane. Have you called your lawyer yet? We need to sue them for ruining our reception." DeAndre did not step toward her. He looked at the makeup artist and gave a sharp tilt of his head toward the door. "Leave us," he said quietly. The makeup artist did not need to be told twice. She grabbed her bag and scurried out of the room, leaving them entirely alone. DeAndre walked over to the vanity. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached into his tuxedo pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened the 60-page financial dossier Diana had sent him. He placed the phone face up on the glass table directly in front of his new bride. "Explain this," he demanded, his voice perfectly flat. "Explain the $80,000 in unsecured credit card debt. Explain the luxury SUV you claimed you sold that was actually repossessed by the bank 3 months ago. And while you are at it, explain why your parents have 2 underwater mortgages on a house they claim they own outright." Brittany looked down at the glowing screen. For a split second, the mask completely slipped. Her perfectly contoured face went slack with genuine terror as she recognized the official bank logos and the glaring red collection notices. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down. Her survival instinct kicked in, and it was fueled entirely by delusion. She pushed the phone away, like it was physically burning her. "This is completely fake," she yelled, her voice jumping an octave. "I cannot believe you are actually looking at this, DeAndre. Diana made this up. I told you she works in corporate management. She probably hired someone to forge these documents just to make me look bad. She has always been fiercely jealous of me. She wants to ruin my marriage because she is completely alone and miserable." "You are telling me your sister forged a federally regulated credit report?" DeAndre asked, crossing his arms. "You expect me to believe she fabricated public property records and bank repo notices just because she is jealous of your internet followers?" "Yes," Brittany screamed, standing up so fast she knocked her chair backward. "You do not know her, DeAndre. She is psychotic. She has been plotting this for months. We are rich. My family is wealthy. You know this." Before DeAndre could dismantle her ridiculous argument, the suite door burst open again. Thomas and Susan rushed into the room. They looked frantic, but the moment they saw DeAndre standing there, they instantly shifted into damage control mode. The synchronized performance was chilling to watch. "DeAndre, thank goodness," Thomas said, puffing out his chest and attempting a hearty fake laugh. "Do not let that ridiculous manager stress you out. I just got off the phone with my wealth manager. Our assets are currently tied up in a massive offshore real estate investment right now, so my physical cards hit a temporary security limit. It is a minor liquidity issue. I will have a wire transfer cleared by Monday morning." DeAndre looked from Thomas to the phone on the vanity, and then to Susan. Susan quickly stepped forward, wrapping her arm around Brittany. "And I hope you are not listening to a word Diana says," Susan chimed in, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. "We just found out she sent you some forged financial papers. She has had severe mental health issues for years, DeAndre. She makes up these elaborate lies to get attention. We try to keep it quiet to protect her, but she is clearly having an episode today." DeAndre stood perfectly still, letting their lies wash over him. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They did not hesitate. They did not stumble. They effortlessly backed up Brittany's insane forgery story without even needing to coordinate it beforehand. It meant they had done this a million times before. The entire family was a unified front of financial fraud. They were not just protecting Brittany, they were actively working together to trap him. DeAndre did not immediately confront them. He needed the explosion to happen in the most public, undeniable way possible. He looked at Thomas, who was still enthusiastically lying about offshore accounts and wire transfers. "You should probably go talk to the venue manager." Then, DeAndre said, his voice perfectly calm, betraying none of the absolute rage boiling underneath. "If it is just a temporary liquidity issue, I am sure he will understand once you explain your offshore investments to him. Go sort it out, Thomas. I will wait here with Brittany." Thomas puffed out his chest, his confidence artificially restored by DeAndre's apparent calm. "Exactly," he proclaimed loudly, adjusting his bow tie. "That is exactly what I am going to do. These people need to learn how to treat elite clients. I will be right back." He marched out of the bridal suite, leaving Susan to continue stroking Brittany's hair. DeAndre simply stood near the door watching them with the detached, analytical stare of a man observing two people trapped in a burning building of their own making. Thomas strode down the corridor, his rented tuxedo shoes clicking aggressively against the marble floor. He pushed open the double doors leading into the main lobby. The space was mostly empty, save for a few confused guests mingling near the coat check. Standing near the grand staircase was Mr. Harrison, speaking quietly into his earpiece. Thomas marched right up to him, poking a thick finger into the general manager's chest. "Listen here, you arrogant little man." Thomas growled, his face inches from Mr. Harrison's. "You have completely humiliated my family. You took away our food and our champagne based on some ridiculous computer glitch. I have the best lawyers in this state on retainer. By Monday morning, I will own this entire estate and you will be out on the street. I am suing you for emotional distress, public humiliation, and breach of contract." Mr. Harrison did not flinch. He did not step back. He simply looked at the finger pressing into his chest and then looked up into Thomas' red, sweating face. "There is no contract, sir," Mr. Harrison replied smoothly. "The contract was contingent upon a valid payment source or an authorized override. Since both have been revoked, you are currently trespassing on private property, and I highly doubt your lawyers will take the case once they see your current credit score." Thomas turned purple. "How dare you?" he bellowed, drawing the attention of the remaining guests in the lobby. "I demand to speak to the actual owner of this estate right now. Get them on the phone immediately. Let us see what they have to say when I tell them their management is harassing a multimillionaire." Mr. Harrison sighed, a small, perfectly practiced sigh of a man who had dealt with delusional rich people for decades. "If you insist, sir," he said calmly. He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out his smartphone and dialed a single number. He hit the speakerphone button and held the device between them. The phone rang twice. "Yes, Gregory." My voice echoed through the speaker, cutting sharply through the tension in the lobby. Thomas completely failed to recognize his own daughter's voice. His mind was so completely convinced that I was a poor corporate drone that he could not even begin to connect me to the owner of a multi-million-dollar luxury estate. "Listen here, whoever you are," Thomas yelled, leaning toward the phone. "Your manager is completely out of line. I am Thomas Vance, and I am the father of the bride. We are experiencing a temporary liquidity issue, and your staff is treating us like common criminals. If you do not reinstate our dinner service immediately, I will drag your company through the courts until you are bankrupt." I was sitting at my large mahogany desk in my downtown office, the signed eviction notice for my parents' house resting right in front of me. I listened to his arrogant, empty threats and felt a cold smile spread across my face. "Do not bother calling your lawyers." "Thomas," I said, my voice dropping the formal tone and shifting into the familiar cadence he knew so well. "I am the owner, and I am coming back to handle your eviction myself." Thomas froze. The color instantly vanished from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. He stared at the phone, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He recognized the voice now. "Diana." He whispered the name, catching in his throat like a piece of dry bread. "Pack your things, Thomas," I said, the finality in my voice ringing clear across the speakerphone. "And tell your daughter the party is officially over." I ended the call, leaving him standing there in the middle of the grand lobby, staring at the general manager in absolute horror. The illusion was completely shattered. There was no multimillionaire status. There were no offshore accounts. There was only his oldest daughter, the one he had thrown away, coming back to clean house. I did not immediately turn my car around to head back to the estate. Instead, I pulled into the private underground parking garage of my downtown corporate headquarters. I took the secure private elevator straight up to my penthouse executive suite. I had a very quick wardrobe change to make. The understated conservative beige dress I had worn to the wedding was specifically chosen to blend into the background. My mother and sister had demanded I look like a dowdy, forgotten relative so they could shine, and I had simply played the part to keep the peace. But the play was officially over, and keeping the peace was no longer on my agenda. I walked into my massive executive washroom and pulled out my favorite custom-tailored charcoal gray designer suit. The sharp, structured lines and immaculate fit exuded pure, unapologetic authority. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and my most intimidating black stilettos. I pulled my hair back from its soft curls into a sleek, tight professional bun. When I looked in the full-length mirror, I no longer saw the quiet scapegoat of the Vance family. I saw the founder and CEO of Apex Hospitality Group. While I changed, I made 2 quick phone calls. The first was to David Thorne, my ruthless lead corporate attorney. The second was to my private security contractor. By the time I took the elevator back down to the ground floor lobby, my team was already waiting for me. David stood by the revolving glass doors, holding a slim leather briefcase containing the eviction notices and the property deeds. Flanking him were Jackson and Cole, 2 massive private security professionals who usually handled high-profile celebrity clients at my luxury resorts. They wore tailored black suits and discreet earpieces looking like absolute brick walls. "Are we ready, Miss Diana?" David asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "We have a massive trespassing issue at the Grand Monarch," I told him, walking past them toward the waiting black SUV my driver had pulled around to the curb. My Aston Martin was too small for the entourage. "Let us go secure my property." The drive back to the estate felt entirely different from the drive away. There was no sadness, no lingering hope of family reconciliation. There was only the cold, precise execution of a business transaction. As our heavy SUV pulled up the winding, illuminated driveway of the estate, the valet attendants immediately recognized my vehicle. They scrambled to clear the VIP drop-off zone, waving away a confused guest who was trying to retrieve their car early. My driver parked right at the front entrance. Jackson stepped out first, his massive frame blocking the pathway as he opened my door. I stepped out into the humid night air, the sharp, authoritative click of my stilettos echoing against the imported cobblestone. David and Cole followed closely behind, forming a tight, impenetrable diamond formation around me. We walked forcefully through the heavy glass doors into the grand lobby. Thomas was still standing exactly where I had left him on the phone, staring blankly at Mr. Harrison in a state of absolute catatonic shock. When he heard the synchronized heavy footsteps of my team approaching, he slowly turned his head. His eyes widened, taking in my sharp designer suit, the towering security guards, and the ruthless corporate energy radiating from our group. He opened his mouth to speak, raising a trembling hand, but I did not even break my stride. I walked right past him, ignoring his existence entirely. "Follow me, Thomas," I commanded over my shoulder without looking back. "You are going to want to be in the room for this." Mr. Harrison fell into step beside me, smoothly handing David the unpaid invoice and the revoked event contract. "The situation inside has deteriorated significantly." Miss Diana, Mr. Harrison reported, his voice completely calm despite the chaos. "The guests are growing extremely agitated regarding the bar closure, and the bride is currently hiding in the bridal suite with her mother and the groom." "Go fetch them," I instructed without slowing down. "Tell them the owner requires their immediate presence on the dance floor." I approached the heavy oak double doors of the main ballroom. Inside, the live band was desperately trying to maintain a cheerful atmosphere by playing an upbeat pop song, but the sound was chaotic, clashing with the angry murmuring of 300 hungry, sober guests. Influencers were still holding up their phones, recording the empty tables and complaining loudly to their audiences. Jackson and Cole pushed the heavy double doors open for me. I stepped into the ballroom, the bright chandelier light catching the sharp lapels of my suit. I did not need to shout to get their attention. I simply looked at the bandleader and gave him a sharp horizontal slicing motion across my throat. The bandleader immediately stopped playing his saxophone. The drummer fumbled his sticks and the bass player quickly muted his strings. The sudden screeching halt of the music acted like a vacuum, sucking all the ambient noise out of the massive room. 300 heads turned toward the entrance simultaneously. The flashing ring lights of the influencers pivoted toward me, capturing my entrance in stunning high definition. I stood at the top of the carpeted steps, flanked by my massive security team, and my attorney looking down at the crowd that had banished me just an hour ago. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that usually precedes a devastating storm. 300 pairs of eyes were locked onto me. I took my first step down the carpeted stairs, and the sharp, rhythmic click of my stilettos echoed like a gavel striking wood. Jackson and Cole moved in perfect synchronization with me, while David walked slightly to my left, holding his leather briefcase. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, the sea of guests instinctively parted. They stepped back, pulling their chairs and their expensive gowns out of our way, creating a wide, clear path directly to the center of the polished wood dance floor. I saw the internet influencers lowering their phones slightly, their mouths hanging open in total confusion. They had spent the entire evening broadcasting the humiliation of the poor sister who got kicked out into the alleyway. Now they were staring at a woman who looked like she could buy their entire careers with a single phone call. I kept my gaze locked straight ahead. I did not look at the confused groomsmen or the whispering bridesmaids. I walked to the exact center of the room and stopped right beneath the massive crystal chandelier. For a brief moment, nobody dared to breathe. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like you could cut it with a knife. Then the spell was suddenly broken by a frantic rustling of fabric coming from the direction of the bridal suite corridor. My mother burst through the crowd violently, shoving a waiter out of her way. Susan was a chaotic vision of panic and rage. Her expensive mother of the bride dress was slightly wrinkled, and her carefully styled hair was beginning to frizz from the humidity and her own excessive sweating. She saw me standing in the center of the room, looking like the very authority she had always tried to suppress, and something inside her simply snapped. She did not care that DeAndre's dignified parents were watching her every move from their VIP table. She did not care about the hundreds of smartphone cameras still rolling. She abandoned every single ounce of her fake upper-class etiquette and charged across the dance floor like a wild animal. She reached out her hands curled into claws, aiming directly for my arms. In her delusional mind, she thought she could physically drag me out of the room to reassert her dominance. "How dare you show your face here, you spiteful witch!" She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried perfectly through the silent room. "You are ruining everything. Get out of here right now before I have you arrested." She never even made it within 3 feet of me. Jackson and Cole did not even need to communicate with each other. They stepped forward seamlessly, crossing their massive frames in front of me, creating an impenetrable human wall of solid muscle and tailored black fabric. Susan slammed into Jackson's outstretched arm, bouncing off his chest like a bird hitting a thick pane of glass. She stumbled backward, her heels slipping awkwardly on the polished wood floor. She gasped in shock, completely unaccustomed to anyone ever telling her no, let alone physically stopping her from throwing a tantrum. Before she could regain her balance and launch another hysterical physical attack, David Thorne smoothly stepped around the security guards. My corporate attorney did not look angry or intimidated. He looked entirely bored, which was somehow much more terrifying to witness. He popped the gold latches on his leather briefcase with a loud click and pulled out a thick stack of crisp white legal documents. He held them out directly toward my mother. "Susan Vance, he said, his voice projecting with the clear, practiced cadence of a seasoned corporate litigator. "You are currently trespassing on private commercial property owned by Apex Hospitality Group. I am officially serving you with a permanent cease and desist order regarding your ongoing harassment and financial extortion of my client." David shoved the heavy stack of papers directly against her chest, forcing her to reflexively grab them so they would not fall to the floor. Furthermore, he continued loudly enough for the entire back row of the ballroom to hear, "You are also being served with a formal notice of eviction for the residential property you currently occupy. My client has acquired your defaulted mortgage portfolio from the bank. You have until 8 o'clock on Monday morning to vacate the premises, or law enforcement officers will physically remove your belongings to the curb." Susan stared down at the legal documents in her hands, her manic, aggressive energy evaporating instantly. She looked at the bold black lettering at the top of the pages. Her mouth dropped open in sheer terror. She looked up at the towering security guards, then past them to where I stood completely untouched and entirely unbothered. The crowd erupted into a massive wave of shocked gasps. DeAndre's mother, the retired judge, nodded slowly from her table, recognizing the devastating, undeniable legality of the trap that had just snapped shut. I stepped around my frozen mother, leaving her clutching her eviction notice like a life preserver on a sinking ship. I walked purposefully toward the elevated stage where the wedding band and the DJ were set up. The musicians quickly stepped aside, sensing the absolute shift in authority. I reached out and took the wireless microphone directly from the DJ's hand. He did not protest. He just handed it over and took a respectful step back. I flicked the switch on the microphone. A soft electronic thump echoed through the massive speakers, instantly commanding the attention of every single person in the room. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to scream or cry or throw a tantrum the way my mother and sister always did. When you hold all the power, you can afford to speak softly. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice perfectly steady and terrifyingly calm. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Diana. I am Brittany's older sister. I am also the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Hospitality Group, which means I am the sole owner of the Grand Monarch Estate." A collective murmur rippled through the sea of guests. The influencers in the crowd immediately raised their phones higher, adjusting their ring lights and changing their camera angles to get a better shot of me standing on the stage in my custom-tailored suit. Earlier tonight, my sister stood at her head table and bragged to her internet followers about a wealthy anonymous sponsor who had generously gifted her this entire venue. I continued pacing slowly across the front of the stage. She claimed this $150,000 reception was a reward from the universe for her positive energy and her flawless lifestyle brand. I am here to correct that narrative. There was no secret elite fan. I was the sponsor. I fully funded this entire evening as a wedding present. I wanted my sister to have the night of her dreams, despite the fact that our parents are completely bankrupt and drowning in multiple defaulted loans. Susan let out a strangled gasp from the middle of the dance floor, trying desperately to hide her face behind the legal documents David had just served her. I ignored her and kept my eyes focused on the crowd. But when I arrived tonight to celebrate, I found my seating assignment, I said, my tone dropping into a glacial chill. I was not placed at the family table. I was not even placed in this ballroom. My sister placed my table outside on the concrete service patio, pushed directly against the kitchen dumpsters. She told me to stay out of the professional photographs because my corporate appearance would ruin her wealthy illusion. I looked directly at DeAndre's family. His mother, the retired judge, narrowed her eyes in pure disgust, not at me, but at the empty chair where Brittany was supposed to be sitting. His father shook his head sadly, realizing the depths of the deception. I am a firm believer in returning the exact energy I receive. I announced, my voice echoing cleanly across the silent room. Since I was treated like garbage, I decided to take my gift and throw it away. The financial sponsorship for this wedding has been permanently revoked. Because the Vance family has zero available credit to cover their massive bill, this event is officially canceled. You do not have to go home right now, but you can no longer stay on my property. As the final words left my mouth, the heavy oak doors leading to the bridal suite corridor swung violently open. Brittany stumbled out into the main ballroom. Her flawless bridal makeup was completely ruined with thick black mascara streaming down her cheeks, leaving dark streaks over her heavy foundation. She took one look at me standing on the stage with a microphone and realized her ultimate nightmare had come to life. Her carefully constructed world of fake wealth and internet fame was being dismantled live on camera for millions to see. "Stop!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, frantic panic. She ran clumsily across the room, tripping over the hem of her expensive unpaid gown. "Stop looking at her! She is lying! Turn your cameras off right now!" She lunged toward a group of her own bridesmaids, who were holding their phones up and recording the entire spectacle. She aggressively slapped a phone out of one girl's hand, sending the expensive device clattering loudly across the polished wooden floor. The bridesmaid gasped and immediately stepped back, looking at Brittany like she was a rabid animal. "I said stop recording me!" Brittany screamed at the top of her lungs, her face contorted into an ugly mask of sheer desperation. "You are supposed to be my friends. Put your phones away before I sue all of you." But nobody put their phones away. In fact, more guests started recording, fascinated by the train wreck unfolding before them. The grand illusion was completely shattered. There was no elegant bride manifesting luxury. There was only a broke, lying woman having a massive public breakdown in the middle of a venue she was currently being evicted from. Brittany's screams continued to bounce off the high vaulted ceilings of the ballroom, but suddenly a new presence commanded the room. DeAndre's mother, Miriam, stood up from her seat at the VIP table. Miriam was a woman who had spent 30 years on the bench presiding over complex legal battles and high-profile corporate fraud cases. She possessed an aura of absolute authority. When she moved, people naturally got out of her way. She smoothed the skirt of her elegant navy gown and walked directly toward the stage with slow, deliberate steps. Brittany stopped screaming the moment she saw her mother-in-law approaching. She desperately tried to switch back to her practiced victim role. "Miriam, please," she begged, her voice trembling with fake tears. "Diana is completely crazy. She is making all of this up to ruin my wedding. You have to believe me." Miriam did not even look at her. She bypassed the crying bride completely and walked right up to the edge of the stage where I was standing with my legal team. She looked up at me, her expression completely unreadable. "Miss Diana," Miriam said, her voice projecting with the practiced clarity of a courtroom judge, "I have spent my entire professional career separating fact from fiction. You have just made some very serious public allegations regarding property ownership and financial fraud. I do not deal in gossip. I deal in evidence. I would like to see the proof." I nodded respectfully. I gestured to David, who immediately pulled a duplicate set of documents from his leather briefcase. He stepped forward and handed the thick stack of papers down to Miriam. She pulled a pair of reading glasses from her silver clutch and began to review the paperwork right there in the middle of the dance floor. The room was so quiet you could hear the rustle of the thick parchment paper as she turned the pages. She read the state corporate registry. She examined the notarized property deed for the Grand Monarch estate, checking the official seals. She looked at the unpaid itemized invoice with the revoked friends and family override clearly printed at the bottom. Finally, she looked at the summary page of the financial background check, highlighting the Vance family's severe massive debt. It took her exactly 2 minutes to process the legal reality. When she lowered her glasses, her expression had shifted from neutral inquiry to absolute cold disgust. She turned slowly to face Brittany, who was now shaking violently, realizing that her lies had just hit a brick wall of legal literacy. "You told my son that your family was incredibly wealthy," Miriam stated, her voice slicing through the silent ballroom like a scalpel. "You told me directly that your family secured this venue through elite social connections. But these documents are legally binding state records. They prove that you are not only entirely bankrupt, but that you have been actively lying to us since the very day you were introduced to our family." Susan tried to intervene, shuffling forward with her eviction notice still crumpled in her shaking hand. Miriam, please, it is just a temporary cash flow problem, Susan stammered, sweating profusely. The money is tied up in offshore accounts. Miriam held up a single hand, silencing my mother instantly. Do not insult my intelligence. Miriam snapped, her tone sharp and unforgiving. I have sent people to federal prison for lesser financial fraud than what I am looking at right now. There are no offshore accounts. There is only massive unsecured debt and a mountain of pathetic lies. Miriam turned her devastating gaze back to Brittany, who physically shrank back. You tried to put my son's sister-in-law outside by the trash while actively stealing from her. Miriam announced, her voice dripping with pure contempt. You accepted a $150,000 gift and repaid it with public humiliation. That level of entitlement is not just disrespectful, it is completely pathological. Brittany opened her mouth to sob, but Miriam cut her off completely. We are done here, the mother announced, her voice ringing with absolute finality. She turned to her husband and the rest of DeAndre's family, seated at the VIP tables. Gather your things immediately. We are leaving this circus. The impact of her words hit the room like a physical shockwave. The influencers in the crowd whispered excitedly, capturing every second of the judge's brutal takedown. They had come for a luxury wedding but were getting a front row seat to a high society eviction. The groom's family, all 150 of them, stood up in perfect unison. There was no arguing, no hesitation, and absolutely no second-guessing the matriarch's verdict. Chairs scraped against the polished wood as aunts, uncles, and cousins moved toward the exits. They began collecting their coats and purses with quiet, dignified efficiency. I watched from the stage as the entire right side of the ballroom prepared to walk out, leaving Brittany standing completely alone in the center of her shattered fantasy. I watched from the stage as the entire right side of the ballroom prepared to walk out, leaving Brittany standing completely alone in the center of her shattered fantasy. For several seconds she remained completely frozen. The heavy sound of DeAndre's family, marching toward the lobby doors, was like a death knell, ringing for her perfectly calculated financial rescue plan. As the reality of her lost marriage and her lost ATM finally registered in her brain, she slowly turned her head back toward me. Her eyes were wide and completely unhinged. The pathetic sadness and the carefully practiced victimhood she had tried to use on her mother-in-law were entirely gone. They were instantly replaced by pure, unfiltered feral rage. "You ruined my life!" she shrieked, her voice echoing violently over the scraping chairs and the departing footsteps of the guests. She did not just yell, she charged. Brittany gathered the heavy white silk of her unpaid wedding gown in her fists and sprinted toward the stage. She bypassed her frozen mother and lunged up the carpeted stairs like a wild animal. Her hands were curled into sharp claws, aiming directly for my face and the microphone I was holding. She wanted to physically tear the truth right out of my hands. "I will kill you!" she screamed, thick drops of spit flying from her mouth. I did not even flinch. I did not need to step back or defend myself. Jackson and Cole moved with terrifying efficiency. Before Brittany could even cross the threshold of the wooden stage, Jackson stepped directly into her path while Cole flanked her right side. Brittany slammed hard into Jackson, but his massive frame did not budge an inch. He smoothly caught her flailing arms, grabbing her wrists with a firm professional grip. Cole stepped in and secured her shoulders, spinning her around so she was facing away from me and pinning her arms safely behind her back. They did not hurt her, but they completely neutralized her violent attack in less than 3 seconds. "Let me go," she thrashed violently, kicking her expensive heels backward. Her sudden frantic movements caused her intricate bridal updo to completely unravel. A delicate diamond hairpin snapped, and her long sheer veil caught beneath Cole's heavy black shoe. The fragile fabric tore violently away from her head, ripping right down the center and falling to the floor like a discarded rag. Her thick foundation and heavy mascara smeared completely across her cheeks, making her look like a deranged clown rather than an elegant bride. Down on the dance floor, her influencer friends were having an absolute field day. Every single one of them had their glowing smartphones pointed directly at the stage. They were eagerly zooming in on the ripped veil, the smeared makeup, and the shocking sight of the bride being physically restrained by private security. I could hear some of them narrating the live stream, whispering to their audiences about how insane the whole situation was. Brittany saw the red recording lights flashing from the crowd and began sobbing uncontrollably, thrashing against the immovable grip of my security team. "Stop looking at me," she wailed, shutting her eyes tightly. "Stop recording me right now. Let me go." "Remove her from the stage," I instructed, calmly lowering the microphone. Jackson and Cole effortlessly lifted Brittany by her arms, carrying her back down the short flight of stairs and depositing her firmly onto the dance floor. She collapsed onto her knees, the heavy torn layers of her ruined gown pooling around her as she buried her face in her hands. Seeing his golden child sobbing on the floor, his wealthy in-laws walking out the door, and his entire financial future crumbling into dust, Thomas finally broke. The arrogant, aggressive man, who had threatened to sue my general manager just 30 minutes ago, completely vanished. In his place was a pathetic, sweating, desperate old man whose rented tuxedo jacket was soaked through with nervous perspiration. He stumbled forward, his shoulders slumped and his bow tie hanging loosely around his neck. He approached the bottom of the stage, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. David Thorne took a proactive step forward, resting his hand on his leather briefcase, but I held up a finger, signaling my lawyer to wait. I wanted to hear exactly what my father had to say, now that he had absolutely no leverage left. "Diana, please," Thomas begged, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "Please, you have made your point. You have won this. But you have to stop this right now. Look at your sister. Look at your mother. We are your family." I stared down at him, my expression completely blank. "Yes," he pleaded, clasping his hands together in a pathetic physical gesture of prayer. "We share the same blood. You cannot just throw us out onto the street. You cannot let DeAndre's family leave like this. Tell the judge it was a massive mistake. Tell her the financial records were just a misunderstanding. If you have the money to own this entire estate, you have the money to fix this for us. Please, Diana, keep this in the family. We can go to counseling. We can make things right. Just please do not destroy us." His words were not an apology. They were a desperate plea for a financial bailout disguised as familial love. He was perfectly fine treating me like garbage when he thought he had the upper hand, but the exact moment I held the cards, he suddenly remembered we were related. I looked at the pathetic man begging at my feet, then at my mother, clutching her eviction notice, and finally at my sister weeping on the floor, surrounded by the flashing cameras of her fake friends. They were a perfect portrait of toxic entitlement, completely collapsing in on itself. "Keep this in the family." I repeated the words slowly, letting them echo across the massive silent ballroom. The phrase tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. I stepped closer to the edge of the wooden stage, looking down at the sweating, trembling man who had spent my entire life making me feel completely invisible. "Thomas, we have not been a family since the day I turned 18, I said, my voice projecting with icy precision. "Do you remember what you did that day? You marched into the bank and drained my entire college savings account. You took every single penny I had saved from working after school jobs since I was 14 years old. And you used it to buy Brittany a brand new luxury sedan because she threw a massive temper tantrum about having to drive a used car to her high school graduation." Thomas flinched violently as if I had physically struck him across the face. He opened his mouth to offer another pathetic excuse, but I did not give him the chance to speak. "You did not care about my education." I continued, my tone rising slightly, demanding the attention of every single person left in the room. "You did not care about my future or my well-being. You only cared about maintaining the fake illusion that your golden child had everything handed to her on a silver platter. I had to take out massive student loans and work 3 different jobs just to survive. I built my corporate empire completely alone. I acquired Apex Hospitality Group through my own sweat, my own sleepless nights, and my own relentless determination, while you two were busy taking out second mortgages to fund her fake internet lifestyle. Susan let out a loud dramatic sob from the middle of the floor, but I ignored her completely. So do not stand there and invoke the word family to me, I stated firmly. You only claim me as family when you need a financial bailout. Today you showed me exactly where my place is in your lives. Outside by the dumpsters. And I am simply staying exactly where you put me. Outside of your lives forever. Thomas lowered his head, burying his face in his shaking hands. He wept openly, but I felt absolutely no pity for him. The emotional extortion that had chained me to them for 33 years was finally completely severed. Then the crowd parted one final time. DeAndre stepped forward from the shadows of the bridal corridor. He was no longer the beaming, happy groom from this morning. His posture was rigid, his shoulders squared, and his face was completely devoid of any warmth or affection. He walked slowly across the polished wood of the dance floor, his polished shoes echoing loudly in the quiet room. The influencers in the crowd immediately pointed their phone cameras toward him, sensing the final devastating climax of the evening. He stopped right in front of Brittany. She was still kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the torn layers of her unpaid Vera Wang gown. Her diamond tiara was sitting crookedly on her head, and her face was a smeared mess of expensive makeup and hysterical tears. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with desperate, frantic hope. DeAndre. She whimpered, reaching out a trembling hand to grab the dark fabric of his tuxedo pants. Baby, please. You have to understand. We can fix this. We can just sign the marriage certificate tonight and figure the rest of the money stuff out tomorrow. I love you so much. Please do not leave me. DeAndre looked down at her. He did not reach down to help her up. He did not offer her a single shred of comfort or reassurance. He looked at her with the cold, calculating eyes of a businessman inspecting a fraudulent contract. You do not love me, Brittany, he said, his voice deep and echoing with devastating finality. You love my credit score. You love my business portfolio. You love the idea of using my hard-earned money to dig your parents out of the massive financial grave they dug for themselves. Brittany gasped, shaking her head frantically. No, no, that is not true, she cried. I run a luxury auto brokerage. DeAndre continued, ignoring her pathetic protests. I negotiate with ruthless businessmen every single day. Did you honestly think I would not eventually find out about your $80,000 in hidden credit card debt? Did you think I would not discover the luxury SUV you had repossessed? You targeted me. You manipulated me. You stood at the altar today and made sacred vows to me while actively plotting to use my bank accounts to save your fraudulent, pathetic lifestyle. He took a slow, deliberate breath, settling the absolute truth over the room. I wanted a partner, DeAndre stated firmly, looking her dead in the eye. You wanted an ATM. He reached up to his left lapel. With a swift, decisive motion, he unclipped the expensive imported white orchid boutonniere. He held it between his fingers for a brief second before letting it drop. The flower landed softly onto the torn, stained layers of her ruined wedding dress. Do not ever contact me again, DeAndre added, turning his back on her. And do not bother looking for the marriage license. I already tore it to pieces and threw it in the trash, right where you tried to put your sister. DeAndre did not wait for her response. He turned his back on the sobbing woman who was supposed to be his wife and walked toward the VIP tables. He looked at his mother Miriam and gave a single sharp nod. Miriam nodded back. Without needing to shout or make a grand dramatic gesture, DeAndre simply raised his right hand and motioned toward the grand lobby doors. The response was instantaneous and breathtaking to witness. All 150 members of the groom's family stood up in perfect unison. There was no chaotic scrambling, no hysterical crying, and no frantic whispering. These were dignified people who knew exactly how to handle a disgraceful situation. They picked up their evening coats, their designer purses, and their unspent wedding gifts. They formed a neat, orderly procession, moving out of the ballroom like a silent army retreating from a contaminated battlefield. The contrast was staggering. On the left side of the room, Brittany's influencer friends were still aggressively shoving their phone cameras into each other's faces, trying to get the best angle of the bridal meltdown for their social media channels. On the right side of the room, DeAndre's family moved with absolute quiet grace. They did not look back. They did not take pictures. They simply walked out, leaving their half of the massive venue completely deserted. The empty chairs and the untouched water pitchers on their side of the room stood as a silent, mocking monument to Brittany's failed manipulation. As the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind the last departing member of the groom's family, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted again. The immediate threat of the canceled wedding had passed, but the financial execution was just beginning. I looked down at my father, who was still kneeling on the polished wood floor, watching his wealthy retirement plan literally walk out the door. David Thorne stepped past me. My corporate attorney walked down the short flight of stairs, his polished leather shoes echoing in the newly emptied space. He bypassed Brittany entirely, stepping over the torn remnants of her expensive veil. He stopped directly in front of Thomas. Thomas looked up, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. He stared at the slim leather briefcase in David's hand as if it contained a loaded weapon. He was not wrong. Financial weapons are often much more devastating than physical ones. David popped the gold latches once again and retrieved a single thick packet of legal documents bound by a blue cover. He did not hand it over gently. He dropped it flat onto Thomas' chest, forcing the older man to catch it awkwardly against his rented tuxedo shirt. "What is this?" Thomas whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. He looked desperately toward Susan, who was still clutching her own paperwork a few feet away. "Have you not punished us enough, Diana?" I stepped up to the edge of the stage, looking down at the man who had traded my future for a luxury sedan. "This is not a punishment, Thomas," I explained, my voice devoid of any emotion. "This is just basic corporate accounting." I watched his trembling hands fumble with the cover page. You see, I continued projecting my voice so the remaining guests could hear exactly how deep the deception ran. Apex Hospitality Group does not just buy luxury estates. We also acquire distressed financial assets. Last month, a regional bank was looking to offload a toxic portfolio of bad loans and underwater mortgages. I reviewed the portfolio and found your name listed right at the very top. Thomas' eyes widened in sheer terror as his brain finally processed the bold legal text on the first page. "You have not made a full mortgage payment in 8 months," I stated firmly. "You took out a second mortgage to pay for this absurd wedding, and you immediately defaulted on that one as well. The bank was preparing to foreclose on you next week. But I bought the debt. I own the mortgage on your sprawling suburban colonial house. I am officially your bank." Thomas let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob. He dropped the paperwork onto the floor, staring at me as if I were a ghost. "And as your bank, I am officially denying any further extensions or grace periods." I announced, the finality of my words ringing through the silent ballroom. "You are in total default. The notice my lawyer just handed you is the official foreclosure documentation. The grace period is 0 days. The eviction process legally begins at 8:00 sharp on Monday morning." Susan let out a piercing shriek, dropping to her knees beside him. She grabbed his arm, shaking him frantically, as if he could magically produce the money to save them. But Thomas just sat there, completely paralyzed. The massive brick fortress of expectations that they had built their entire arrogant lives around was no longer theirs. I had legally bought the very roof over their heads, and I was tearing it down. While my parents collapsed onto the polished wood floor, the remaining guests on the left side of the ballroom began to stir. These were Brittany's carefully curated influencer friends and her perfectly matched bridesmaids. Throughout the entire evening, they had been her loyal audience, hyping up her fake wealth and validating her delusional aesthetic. But loyalty in their superficial world was entirely transactional. It only existed as long as the luxury perks kept flowing. The moment they realized the champagne was gone, the groom had vanished, and the bride was quite literally facing homelessness, the dynamic shifted with brutal speed. I watched from the stage as the realization washed over their perfectly contoured faces. The whispers started immediately spreading through the tables like wildfire. They had heard Miriam, the retired judge, explicitly expose the $80,000 in credit card debt. They had just heard my attorney hand Thomas a notice of foreclosure. The math was not difficult to do. Brittany was not a wealthy socialite manifesting a life of luxury. She was a broke, fraudulent liar who had just been dumped at her own reception. For a lifestyle influencer, reputation is absolute currency. Associating with a proven fraud is brand suicide. The phones that had been eagerly recording the drama just moments ago were swiftly tucked away into expensive designer clutches. The bridesmaids women who had spent the last year calling Brittany their absolute best friend did not rush to the center of the dance floor to comfort her. They did not kneel down to help her fix her torn dress or wipe the smeared mascara from her cheeks. Instead, they exchanged panicked, disgusted glances and immediately started packing up their things. They grabbed their expensive makeup bags, their perfectly wrapped gifts, and their heavy coats. Brittany looked up from the floor, her tear-streaked face registering the sudden movement. She saw her bridal party heading for the main aisle, abandoning the tables entirely. "Wait!" she called out, her voice hoarse and pathetic. "Where are you guys going? The party is not over. We can still go out downtown. We can still take the bridal party pictures by the fountain. Please do not leave." The head bridesmaid, a tall brunette named Madison, stopped in her tracks. She turned around and looked down at Brittany with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. There was no sympathy in her eyes, only the cold calculation of a woman cutting a liability loose to save her own image. "Are you completely delusional?" Madison asked, her voice carrying sharply across the quiet room. "Your husband just walked out on you in front of 300 people. Your parents are getting evicted. You do not even have the money to pay for the tap water on these tables. There is no party, Brittany. You are a complete joke." Madison took a deliberate step closer, crossing her arms over her chest. The silk fabric of her bridesmaid gown shimmered under the crystal chandelier, highlighting the absurd cost of the garment. "And speaking of money, we need to talk about this dress right now. You threw a massive fit last month, demanding that all 8 of us buy these custom $2,000 gowns because they fit your elite high society vision. You swore you would reimburse us the second you got back from your honeymoon using DeAndre's bank accounts." Brittany swallowed hard, shrinking back against the floor. "Madison, please, not right now," she whimpered, looking around desperately for someone to defend her. "I will figure it out. I promise I will get you the money." "You do not have a single dime to figure it out with," Madison snapped aggressively, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceiling. "You lied to us. You made us spend our own hard-earned money to prop up your fake aesthetic so you could look rich on the internet." "I want my $2,000 back, Brittany, and I want it by tomorrow morning, or I am taking you to small claims court and exposing every single lie you ever told us on my main channel for everyone to see." The other bridesmaids nodded in agreement, standing behind Madison like a ruthless firing squad. They did not care that her heart was completely broken. They only cared about the money they had wasted on a scam and the damage to their own personal brands. "I do not have it," Brittany sobbed, burying her face in her hands again. "Please do not leave me here. You are my best friends. We have known each other for years. We were your unpaid props." Madison corrected her coldly, turning away. "Have a nice life, Brittany. Good luck with the eviction." Madison marched toward the exit, the rest of the bridal party following closely behind her in their matching $2,000 dresses. The remaining influencer guests took that as their cue to leave as well. They filed out of the ballroom in a massive wave, whispering and shaking their heads, completely abandoning the woman they had idolized just hours before. The heavy oak doors swung shut for the final time, leaving a hollow, ringing silence in their wake. The massive Grand Monarch ballroom, designed to hold hundreds of celebrating guests, was now entirely empty. There were no musicians, no waiters, and no friends left to witness the aftermath. The only people remaining in the room were me, my security team, and my attorney standing tall on the elevated stage. Down below, on the sprawling dance floor, Brittany sat weeping loudly in her ruined white gown, completely isolated and surrounded only by her ruined parents. The fortress of lies they had built together had violently collapsed, leaving them trapped in the rubble of their own making. I looked down at the pathetic scene for one final moment before giving a subtle nod to Mr. Harrison. He understood exactly what needed to be done. He stepped forward, the polished brass of his name tag catching the chandelier light. Jackson and Cole flanked him, their massive presence serving as a physical reminder that the time for negotiating was over. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, his voice echoing in the cavernous, empty ballroom. "You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate my owner's property," he announced, his tone devoid of any customer service warmth. "If you are still inside this building or anywhere on the estate grounds when that timer expires, you will be arrested and charged with criminal trespassing." Thomas blinked slowly as if waking up from a severe concussion. He looked at the legal foreclosure documents scattered on the floor around him, but made no effort to pick them up. Susan scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp the handle of her designer purse. She tugged at Thomas, pulling him up by the sleeve of his sweat-soaked jacket. "Get up, Thomas," she hissed, her voice raspy from crying. "We have to go. They are going to call the police on us." Brittany remained on the floor, sobbing into her hands. Susan had to practically drag her golden child upright. Brittany struggled to gather the heavy layers of her ruined Vera Wang gown. The delicate silk was already stained with smeared makeup and dirty footprints. As they began a slow, miserable shuffle toward the grand lobby doors, Mr. Harrison stepped into their path, holding up a firm hand. "Not that way," he instructed coldly. "The main lobby has been secured for the evening. You will exit through the rear service corridor." Brittany's head snapped up, her smeared eyes wide with fresh horror. "You cannot make us walk through the kitchen," she protested weakly. "My dress will get completely ruined." "It is already ruined," I pointed out from the stage. "And the service doors are exactly where you wanted me to spend my evening. It is only fitting that you use them to leave." Jackson and Cole stepped behind them physically, herding the disgraced family toward the swinging metal doors of the kitchen. I followed at a comfortable distance, flanked by David, wanting to personally witness their final departure from my property. As we entered the massive industrial kitchen, the loud clattering of pots and pans instantly ceased. The entire catering staff, the waiters, the line cooks, and the dishwashers all stopped what they were doing. These were the very people Brittany had openly mocked earlier in the evening, calling them peasants and demanding they be fired for serving her tap water. They were the people she believed were entirely beneath her. Now the tables were completely turned. Dozens of staff members stood in total silence, watching the fake wealthy family take their walk of shame. The harsh fluorescent lights of the kitchen highlighted every single flaw. Thomas looked like a broken old man, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Susan kept her head down, unable to make eye contact with the working-class people she so deeply despised. Brittany limped along her ripped veil, dragging across the grease-stained industrial floor, her expensive heels slipping awkwardly on the wet tile. None of the workers said a word, but their silent, judgmental stares were far more humiliating than any shouted insult could ever be. They reached the heavy metal loading dock doors. Cole pushed the emergency bar, opening the doors to the humid night air. The family stepped out onto the concrete patio, standing just feet away from the very dumpsters where they had tried to banish me. The irony was heavy and absolute. They walked down the dark service ramp toward the VIP valet parking lot. The area was mostly empty since DeAndre's family and the influencers had already fled. But there was one vehicle still parked under the glowing streetlights. It was Thomas' leased luxury Mercedes-Benz. And parked directly in front of it with its amber hazard lights flashing brightly was a massive heavy-duty tow truck. A man in a neon safety vest was currently hooking thick steel chains to the front axle of the expensive car. Thomas let out a strangled gasp, breaking into a clumsy run. "Hey, stop! What are you doing?" he yelled, waving his arms frantically. "That is my car. You cannot take my car." The tow truck driver did not even pause his work. He casually pulled a clipboard from his belt and checked the license plate. "Are you Thomas Vance?" he asked loudly over the rumble of his diesel engine. Yes, I am, Thomas panted, stopping a few feet away. Unhook my vehicle right now. I have the keys right here in my pocket. The driver shook his head and handed Thomas a yellow slip of paper. Not anymore, buddy. This vehicle is flagged for immediate repossession due to 4 months of missed lease payments. The bank ordered the recovery this morning. I am just doing my job. But how are we supposed to get home? Susan wailed, clutching her purse to her chest. We live 40 miles away. The driver shrugged, climbing up into the high cab of his truck. Sounds like you need to call a cab, lady. Because this car belongs to the bank now. He engaged the hydraulic lift, raising the front tires of the Mercedes off the pavement. Thomas stood frozen in the empty parking lot, watching his final symbol of fake wealth being literally dragged away into the night. Brittany collapsed onto the curb right next to the kitchen dumpsters, burying her face in her knees. They had absolutely nothing left. I turned my back on the pathetic scene unfolding by the dumpsters and gave a brief nod to my security team. We walked back up the concrete service ramp, leaving the Vance family completely alone in the dark parking lot. My driver had already brought the black corporate SUV around to the front entrance of the estate. Jackson opened the heavy door for me, and I slid into the quiet, pristine leather interior, followed closely by David. Cole took the front passenger seat, and the driver immediately pulled away from the curb. David Thorne pulled his secure tablet from his leather briefcase and tapped the screen a few times. He let out a rare, dry chuckle. Miss Diana, you might want to see this, he said, turning the glowing screen toward me. It has only been 20 minutes since the bridal party walked out, but the digital fallout is already catastrophic. I looked at the tablet. Madison, the head bridesmaid, had not waited until morning to enact her revenge. She had immediately gone live on her main channel from the back of her luxury rideshare. The broadcast was already exploding across multiple social media platforms, with hundreds of thousands of active viewers tuning in. Madison was ruthlessly exposing every single lie Brittany had ever told. She displayed high-resolution screenshots of text messages where Brittany admitted she could not afford the $2,000 bridesmaid dresses, but demanded they buy them anyway to maintain her elite high society aesthetic. The live stream then cut to raw, unedited footage taken directly from the ballroom floor. It showed the catering staff mercilessly confiscating the vintage champagne and replacing it with cloudy tap water. It showed Thomas frantically swiping 4 different declined credit cards while sweating profusely. And the grand finale was crystal clear footage of Brittany violently charging the stage, attacking my security team before getting her veil ripped off and being tossed to the floor. The comments section beneath the video was a relentless avalanche of mockery. The internet is completely unforgiving to frauds, especially those who build their entire online persona on making others feel inferior. Viewers were brutally dissecting her entire feed. They pointed out the fake designer bags she had tried to pass off as authentic. They mocked her parents' underwater mortgages and the towed Mercedes. Someone in the comments coined the nickname Dumpster Bride, referring to her seating assignment, and within minutes, it became the #1 trending hashtag across the entire country. Then the corporate cancellations began. Brittany's entire income relied on brand deals from mid-tier beauty companies and boutique fashion labels. These brands carefully monitored social media trends to protect their own public images, and they moved with brutal efficiency. As I watched, a popular cosmetics company released a stark public statement on their official page. We value authenticity and honesty in our brand partners. In light of recent events involving financial deception, we have immediately terminated our promotional contract with Brittany Vance. 3 other major clothing brands followed suit within the hour. Her affiliate links were systematically deactivated. Her promotional discount codes were permanently suspended. The fake sponsorship deals she had spent years cultivating vanished into thin air. Her entire digital empire was being dismantled brick by brick in real time. I handed the tablet back to David and leaned my head against the cool leather headrest of the SUV. I closed my eyes and took a deep, slow breath, letting the quiet hum of the engine wash over me. For 33 years, I had carried the crushing, suffocating weight of my family's expectations and their constant demands for financial rescues. I had lived in a constant state of low-level anxiety, always waiting for the next phone call, the next emergency, the next massive guilt trip. They had functioned as a toxic tumor attached to my life, slowly draining my energy, my joy, and my resources, while offering absolutely nothing but cruel resentment in return. But tonight, the surgery was finally complete. The tumor had been completely and aggressively excised. As the SUV merged onto the quiet highway, putting miles between me and the Grand Monarch estate, I waited for the familiar sting of guilt to hit me. I waited for that old nagging voice conditioned by years of abuse, telling me I should have been the bigger person and saved them. But it never came. Instead, I felt a profound, undeniable physical lightness spread through my chest. My shoulders dropped, releasing decades of tension. The tight, anxious knot in my stomach completely unraveled. I had not just evicted them from my property and called in their debts. I had permanently evicted them from my mind. For the first time in my entire adult life, I was breathing my own air. I was entirely free. The weekend passed in a state of absolute, uninterrupted tranquility. I did not receive a single frantic phone call or manipulative text message. When Monday morning arrived, it brought a brilliant, bright sunrise that poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my downtown penthouse office. I stood behind my massive mahogany desk looking out over the waking city. The chaotic noise of the wedding disaster felt like a distant memory already replaced by the quiet, ordered hum of my corporate empire. My executive assistant, Daniel, knocked softly on the heavy glass door before stepping into the room. He was a master of efficiency, always anticipating my needs before I even voiced them. He placed a steaming ceramic cup of black coffee on my desk, right next to a sleek, encrypted tablet. "Good morning, Miss Diana," Daniel said, his tone professional, but carrying a subtle hint of satisfaction. "I have your morning briefing ready. The 8 o'clock directive has been successfully executed without any major complications." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the rich, dark roast wake my senses. "Walk me through it, Daniel," I instructed, taking my seat in my high-backed leather chair. Daniel tapped the screen of his tablet, bringing up a live report from our property management division. At exactly 8 o'clock this morning, local law enforcement arrived at the suburban residence of Thomas and Susan Vance. The foreclosure notice was officially enforced. The occupants were given 30 minutes to gather their remaining personal items before the county sheriffs physically escorted them off the premises. Locksmiths have already secured the perimeter and changed every deadbolt on the property. The house is now entirely under the legal control of Apex Hospitality Group. "Did they cause a scene?" I asked, recalling my mother's wild tantrum on the dance floor. "According to the site manager, they were surprisingly quiet," Daniel replied, scrolling down to the next page of his report. "They had apparently spent all of Sunday packing their belongings into black trash bags. Several neighbors came out onto their lawns to watch the eviction take place. Thomas and Susan loaded their bags into a cheap rental car and drove away before the locksmiths even finished the front door. It was a poetic mirroring of their exit from the Grand Monarch estate. Once again, they were forced to take a humiliating walk of shame, watched by the very people they had spent years trying to impress with their fake wealth." "And what about Brittany?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. Daniel completely suppressed a smile. "The digital fallout was catastrophic," he reported. "By Sunday afternoon, her social media presence had become completely radioactive. The comment sections across all her platforms were so aggressively flooded with people calling her the dumpster bride that she was forced to entirely deactivate her Instagram and TikTok accounts. Every single one of her brand sponsors has publicly terminated their contracts. She is officially completely unmarketable." "Where is she staying?" I asked, knowing her options were virtually non-existent. "She attempted to book a suite at a luxury boutique hotel downtown late Saturday night," Daniel explained, reading from a private investigator update. However, all of her credit cards triggered immediate fraud alerts and were declined. She is currently checked into a budget roadside motel on the outer city limits. She paid for a 3-night stay using cash, which our investigators assume she salvaged from the wedding gift envelopes that were not confiscated by the groom's family. I looked out the window at the towering skyscrapers. Brittany Vance, the woman who had demanded a $150,000 wedding reception, was now hiding in a cheap motel room with peeling wallpaper and flickering neon lights outside her window. The toxic tumor of my family had not just been excised, it had been completely neutralized. They had absolutely no power left to wield against anyone. Before I could ask Daniel to prepare my schedule for the day, the sleek intercom on my desk buzzed sharply. "Yes," I answered, pressing the glowing button. Miss Diana, the ground floor receptionist, said, her voice slightly hesitant. "I apologize for the interruption, but you have an unexpected visitor in the main lobby. He does not have an appointment, but he is requesting 5 minutes of your time. His name is DeAndre." I raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised. DeAndre was a highly successful luxury auto broker and a man whose time was incredibly valuable. After the absolute nightmare he had endured on Saturday night, I fully expected him to disappear into his own life and try to forget the Vance family entirely. The fact that he was standing in my lobby on a Monday morning meant he had a specific business purpose. Daniel looked at me, waiting for my directive. "Send him up," I told the receptionist. "Have security escort him directly to my office." I closed the financial reports on the tablet and folded my hands on the desk. The personal drama was over, but a new, unexpected professional chapter was apparently just walking through my front door. The heavy glass door to my office swung open, and DeAndre stepped inside. He looked entirely different from the stressed, angry groom I had seen standing in the middle of the ballroom on Saturday night. Today, he was dressed in a sharp navy blue tailored suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. He looked like the highly successful luxury auto broker he truly was. His posture was relaxed, and the dark circles of stress I had noticed at the reception were completely gone. "Please have a seat, DeAndre," I said, gesturing toward the leather guest chairs opposite my desk. He sat down, placing his briefcase on the floor. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment, Diana." He began, his voice calm and steady. "I know you are incredibly busy running this empire, but I needed to come here and speak to you face to face." I leaned back in my chair, observing him. "I assume you are here to discuss the fallout from Saturday night." "I am here to thank you," he said, leaning forward slightly. That was not the response people usually give after a catastrophic wedding cancellation. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. He let out a deep breath, shaking his head slightly. "If you had not sent me that financial dossier, I would have signed a legally binding marriage certificate with a woman who viewed me as nothing more than a corporate bailout. I would have legally tied myself and my business assets to a family that was actively drowning in debt and fraud. You did not ruin my wedding, Diana. You saved my life. You saved my business. And I am deeply, profoundly grateful to you for having the courage to expose the truth." "You deserve to know the truth," I replied simply. "You are a hard-working man, DeAndre. You built your company from the ground up. I respect that because I did the exact same thing. I could not stand by and watch my sister dismantle your life to fund her illusions." DeAndre nodded, his expression serious. "I appreciate that more than words can say. However, there is a secondary reason I am here." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a sleek silver checkbook. He placed it on my mahogany desk. "I know you revoked the friends and family discount," he explained, "but half of those guests were my family. We ate the appetizers and we drank the champagne before the truth came out. My family was part of the expense of that evening. I want to write you a check right now to cover the full $150,000 balance. I want to make sure your venue and your staff are properly compensated for the incredible inconvenience my intended marriage caused your business." I looked at the silver checkbook resting on my desk and felt a genuine wave of respect for the man sitting across from me. He was honorable. He was taking accountability for a disaster he did not even create, which only solidified my belief that he was an excellent businessman. I reached across the desk and slid the checkbook back toward him. "Put that away, DeAndre," I said firmly. "You do not owe me a single dime." The cost of that reception was the price I willingly paid to finally rid myself of my toxic family. It was an investment in my own peace of mind, and it was worth every single penny. "I will not accept your money." He looked at me, hesitating for a moment before slowly returning the checkbook to his pocket. "Thank you, Diana," he said quietly. "But since you are here in a professional capacity," I continued, shifting my posture and leaning forward, "I do have another matter I would like to discuss with you. When I ran that background check on my sister, I also ran a preliminary check on you." DeAndre smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "I would expect nothing less from a CEO. "Your business portfolio is incredibly impressive," I told him. "You have a stellar reputation in the luxury automotive industry. Your client retention rate is phenomenal, and your financial standing is absolutely pristine. Apex Hospitality Group is currently expanding. We are acquiring 3 new luxury resort properties on the West Coast by the end of this fiscal year." I paused, letting the magnitude of the corporate expansion sink in. "We need to completely overhaul our executive transportation fleet," I explained. "We need high-end, reliable luxury vehicles for our VIP guests and corporate partners. It is a multi-million-dollar procurement contract, and I want your brokerage to handle every single vehicle. I do not want to deal with standard commercial dealerships. I want a broker who understands the exact level of luxury and discretion my clients expect. I want to offer your firm the exclusive contract to source and supply the entire executive fleet for Apex Hospitality Group." DeAndre stared at me, his business instincts instantly locking in. The shock of the canceled wedding was completely replaced by the sharp focus of a massive, lucrative corporate deal. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "I am always serious about business," I replied. "My legal team will draft the preliminary contract this afternoon. If your numbers make sense, we can finalize the deal by Friday." DeAndre stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He reached across the desk and offered his hand. I stood up and shook it firmly. The toxic connection we almost shared through my sister was entirely gone. In its place, a new, healthy, and highly profitable alliance had just been formed. Exactly 1 week after that handshake, my corporate world was thriving. The contract with DeAndre was finalized within 48 hours, and his brokerage had already begun delivering the first wave of pristine luxury vehicles to my West Coast properties. My days were filled with board meetings, acquisition strategies, and the quiet satisfaction of a life completely under my own control. The silence from my estranged family was golden. I had successfully blocked every known number, email address, and social media account associated with them. I assumed they had finally gotten the message, but toxic people rarely surrender without attempting one final desperate manipulation. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in my penthouse office reviewing a quarterly profit report when my private direct line began to ring. It was a restricted number. I rarely answered restricted calls, but I was expecting a brief check-in from an international investor. I tapped the speaker button on my desk console. "Diana, please do not hang up," a voice pleaded instantly. The sound of my mother's voice filling my immaculate office sent a brief, unexpected chill down my spine. It was not the arrogant, demanding tone she had used when she ordered me to pay for the wedding. It was not the hysterical screaming she had unleashed on the dance floor. This voice was broken, trembling, and entirely stripped of its upper-class facade. I did not speak. I simply listened, letting the silence force her to continue. "I had to buy a cheap prepaid phone from a convenience store just to bypass your security blocks," Susan explained, her voice cracking with forced tears. "Please, Diana, you have to help us. We have absolutely nowhere else to go. The money from the wedding envelopes is almost completely gone. The motel manager is threatening to kick us out tomorrow morning because Thomas got into a shouting match with him over the terrible room conditions." I could hear the harsh roar of highway traffic in the background of the call. She was standing outside in the rain, using a burner phone to beg the daughter she had thrown away. "Brittany will not even get out of bed," Susan sobbed, her breathing jagged and loud over the speaker. She just stares at the wall. Thomas is having chest pains from the stress. We are your family, Diana. I know we made mistakes. I know we treated you unfairly, but we are desperate. You have dozens of empty hotel suites. You have rental properties. Just let us stay in one of your empty units for a few weeks until we can get back on our feet. We will not bother you, I promise. Please, just be the bigger person and show some mercy. I walked slowly away from my desk, leaving her pathetic pleas echoing from the speaker console. I approached the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows and looked out over the sprawling city skyline. The rain was washing the glass, blurring the bright lights of the skyscrapers into soft glowing streaks. I searched my chest for any lingering trace of guilt. I waited for that old familiar feeling of obligation to rise up and choke me. I waited for the childhood conditioning that demanded I sacrifice my own well-being to save my mother from her own consequences. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no guilt. There was no sadness. There was only a profound, crystalline clarity. I realized with absolute certainty that she was not apologizing for her behavior. She was apologizing because she had lost. If I were the one standing in the rain at a convenience store begging for help, she would have hung up the phone without a second's hesitation. She did not want reconciliation. She wanted a free, luxury suite. I turned back toward my desk. I did not offer a grand speech. I did not scream at her or demand an apology for the lifetime of abuse. I simply reached out and pressed the red button terminating the call instantly. Then I picked up my secure tablet and dialed David Thorne. He answered on the first ring. "Good afternoon, Miss Diana." David said, his tone crisp and professional. "David, I need you to initiate the final legal barrier." I instructed, my voice perfectly calm and unwavering. "I just received a harassing phone call from Susan Vance via an untraceable prepaid number. The financial eviction was apparently not enough of a deterrent. I want you to file for permanent restraining orders against Thomas Susan and Brittany Vance immediately." "Understood," David replied, noting the instructions. "What are the specific parameters you wish to set?" "I want a 500-yard protective order," I stated firmly. "They are legally barred from coming anywhere near my physical person, my private residence, or any commercial property owned and operated by Apex Hospitality Group. If they attempt to contact me again by phone, email, or third-party carrier, I want them arrested for violating a court order. Cut off every single avenue of access. I will have the paperwork filed with the judge before the courthouse closes today," David assured me. "They will be served by uniformed officers at their current motel location by tomorrow morning." "Thank you, David," I said. I ended the call and set the tablet down. The heavy iron door on my past had just been slammed shut and securely locked. There would be no second chances, no dramatic family reunions, and no forgiveness. They had made their choices, and now they would have to live with them in the exact place they belonged. Far away from me. Far away from me. 6 months passed since the day the restraining orders were officially served, and the silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever experienced. Without the constant financial drain and emotional sabotage of my family, my corporate empire expanded at an unprecedented rate. Apex Hospitality Group successfully closed the deal on our new flagship property, a sprawling luxury cliffside resort in Big Sur, California. I stood on the massive redwood deck of the new estate, breathing in the crisp ocean air, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. I was no longer the invisible sister hiding in the background. I was the architect of my own incredibly successful reality. The driveway of the new resort was lined with a fleet of pristine imported luxury SUVs. They were all sourced and delivered by DeAndre's brokerage firm. Our professional alliance had proven to be one of the most lucrative decisions I had ever made. His business was absolutely booming. He had just opened a massive second showroom downtown, catering exclusively to high-net-worth corporate clients. He had secured contracts with 3 other major hospitality chains based entirely on the flawless execution of his deal with my company. We occasionally ran into each other at high-level corporate networking events. There was no awkwardness and no lingering trauma from the wedding disaster. We simply exchanged respectful nods, acknowledging the mutual success we had built from the ashes of a massive deception. He was thriving, and so was I. But karma operates on a very specific frequency. While my world expanded into breathtaking coastal resorts, the universe had forced my family into a suffocatingly small reality. My private investigators still sent me automated quarterly updates just to ensure they were not violating the legal boundaries we had set. The reports painted a picture of absolute poetic justice. Brittany, the woman who had demanded a $150,000 wedding reception and treated working-class people like dirt, was now wearing a cheap polyester uniform. She had managed to secure a minimum-wage retail job folding clothes at a massive discount fashion outlet in a dying suburban mall. She spent 8 hours a day standing under harsh fluorescent lights, getting yelled at by angry shoppers over expired coupons. Her hands, which used to be perfectly manicured for sponsored photos, were now dry and cracked from breaking down heavy cardboard shipment boxes in the back warehouse. She had no ring light, no sponsored makeup, and no adoring internet fans to validate her existence. Her digital footprint was entirely erased. She was forced to live in the exact mundane reality she had spent her entire life fiercely mocking. She was furious at the world constantly complaining to her indifferent coworkers, but she had absolutely no way out. Her parents were faring no better. Without the massive suburban colonial house to act as a physical shield for their fake wealth, Thomas and Susan were exposed to the harsh elements of their own financial ruin. They were currently renting a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a noisy, rundown complex right next to a busy interstate. The walls were paper-thin and the plumbing constantly leaked. There were no country club dinners or lavish vacations. The private investigator noted that the police had been called to their unit twice for domestic noise complaints. They spent their days trapped in that tiny space, bitterly blaming each other for the collapse of their fraudulent empire. Susan blamed Thomas for not hiding the money better and for letting his ego ruin the confrontation with the venue manager. Thomas blamed Susan for enabling Brittany's catastrophic spending habits and pushing them into endless debt. They had turned on each other, tearing their own marriage apart because they no longer had me to use as a financial safety net or a convenient scapegoat. I read the final page of the investigator's report and deleted the file from my secure server. I did not feel the need to track them anymore. I had seen enough. The greatest lesson I learned from the entire ordeal was understanding the true nature of karma. Karma was not just about them losing the money or the cars or the fancy house. The real punishment was the psychological prison they were now trapped inside. They were intensely arrogant people who believed they were inherently superior to everyone else. The universe did not just take their money away. It forced them to wake up every single day and participate in the exact working-class struggles they had relentlessly looked down upon. They were forced to live the truth they had tried so desperately to escape through a lifetime of pathetic lies. I turned my back on the ocean view and walked inside my beautiful new resort. The lobby was bustling with wealthy guests, and my highly paid staff was operating with flawless efficiency. I smiled at the general manager and headed toward the executive boardroom. I had a multi-million-dollar merger to discuss, and I did not have a single second left to waste on the past. I pulled open the heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom and stepped inside. The space was immaculate with a long, polished mahogany table surrounded by top-tier executives and legal advisors who respected my vision and valued my time. I took my seat at the head of the table, looking out the panoramic windows at the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. As the meeting commenced and we began finalizing the details of our latest acquisition, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over my entire being. The contrast between this room filled with brilliant, dedicated professionals and the chaotic, toxic environment I had escaped was staggering. I realized in that moment that I had finally built the family I actually deserved. It was a family built on mutual respect, shared ambition, and unwavering loyalty rather than guilt and manipulation. For so long, society conditions us to believe that blood relations are an unbreakable bond. We are taught from a very young age that family is everything and that you must endlessly forgive the people who share your DNA, no matter how poorly they treat you. But biology is not a free pass for abuse. Blood does not give anyone the right to tear down your self-esteem, drain your bank accounts, or treat you like a secondary character in your own life. When people use the word family merely as a weapon to extract your resources or keep you in line, they surrender the right to claim that title. I spent over 3 decades twisting myself into knots, trying to earn the love of people who were fundamentally incapable of offering it. I allowed them to shrink my world because I was afraid of the guilt that would come with walking away. But guilt is a liar. It is a manufactured emotion designed to keep you trapped in toxic cycles. The truth is that walking away from people who continuously disrespect you is the most profound act of self-love you can ever commit. You do not owe your abusers your presence, and you certainly do not owe them your success. Looking back at that night at the Grand Monarch Estate, I realized that the seating chart was the greatest gift my sister could have ever given me. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to put me in my place to remind me that no matter how much money I made or how many properties I acquired, I would always be the unloved outcast of the family. She thought putting me next to the trash would make me feel like garbage. Instead, it reminded me exactly where they belonged. That single act of blatant disrespect shattered the final illusion. It forced me to look at them not as the family I wished I had, but as the entirely toxic individuals they actually were. By walking out of that venue, I did not just leave a wedding reception. I left behind a lifetime of being the designated scapegoat. I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. Now I look around at the empire I have built. I look at the incredible team of people who support me and the healthy professional alliances I have cultivated with people like DeAndre. My life is rich, not just in financial assets, but in peace, quiet, and genuine happiness. I wake up every morning excited for the future instead of dreading the next manufactured family crisis. The space that was once occupied by their constant drama is now filled with joy, ambition, and absolute freedom. We all have the power to curate the energy we allow into our lives. You do not have to accept the role you were assigned in a dysfunctional family dynamic. You have the right to stand up, walk out the door, and build a reality that honors your true value. It takes immense courage to cut the cord, but I promise you that the peace on the other side is worth every single moment of discomfort. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace and your empire? Tell me your story in the comments below. I want to build a community where we support each other in setting firm boundaries and reclaiming our power. Hit the subscribe button if you are ready to stop shrinking yourself to fit into rooms that do not appreciate you. And remember, never let anyone assign your worth at their table, especially when you own the whole building. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, a sanctuary where we are automatically valued simply because we share the same DNA. However, Diana's story brutally dismantles this illusion. The most profound lesson we can extract from her journey is that biology is never a free pass for abuse or exploitation. When the people closest to you use the concept of family as a weapon to extract resources, manipulate your emotions, or diminish your accomplishments, they surrender the right to claim that title. Diana was pushed to the literal margins of a room and seated by the trash simply because she refused to be a financial safety net for her toxic relatives. We often mistake endurance for loyalty. We tolerate disrespect and financial manipulation because we are terrified of the guilt that comes with walking away from our own blood. Yet as Diana demonstrated, stepping away from a toxic dynamic is not an act of cruelty, it is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When you stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that do not honor your value, you reclaim your power. Setting a firm boundary can feel like a devastating earthquake in a dysfunctional family system, but the collapse of those fake relationships is exactly what creates the room for genuine peace and success to thrive. True family is ultimately chosen. It is built on mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering support, much like the new life and professional alliances Diana built after the dust settled. You are the architect of your own reality, and you hold the absolute right to revoke access to anyone who treats you as disposable. Your worth is never dictated by the table you are assigned, but by the empire you build on your own terms. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your peace from a toxic relative? And how did it change your life?